Hello, this is Professor Gruhn, and welcome back. By now you should be on Chapter 2 in the book, and you should be very familiar with MURACH's MySQL book. Hopefully by now you will have done Appendix A and installed all the software. That's key. You cannot do the work in Chapter 2 without doing the assignment for Appendix A and installing all the software. If you haven't done that, shut the video off and go do that, then come back. Then Chapter 1 you've done, hopefully. You've read Chapter 1, you've looked at the PowerPoint slides, and you've answered the 20 questions and submitted them via Blackboard. And that will have given you a basic understanding of the terminology and concepts that will be used throughout the class. Now, today, we're going to get into Chapter 2. It'll be a little more hands-on experience, and we'll start to do some test driving of the MySQL Workbench. And as I mentioned in the appendix video, that we're not going to do a lot of stuff at the command line like some classes teach. This book is focusing it a little differently, which I really like because it's using the tools that you would actually use on your job when doing this. You would use some sort of IDE, interface development environment, and so using the MySQL developer makes a lot of sense, and understanding how these work is key. My plan is this. Basically, I'm going to turn on and off the video as I go, and just kind of read through the pages and the chapters and go through and do the steps. And then at the end, your homework assignment basically for Chapter 2 will be to do the exercises and submit screenshots for each of the steps. There is, for assignment 2, for Chapter 2 assignment, there is a handout just listing steps 1 through 17, and basically it says put a screenshot here, put a screenshot here, put a screenshot here, and that will prove to me that you did those steps. So if you do go through this video, my recommendation is have the book in one hand, have the video up and available, and then have your computer and actually do the work. And basically, this is not a book that you read here in Chapter 2 like you did in Chapter 1. In Chapter 2, if you read it and do what it says, you'll get some hands-on driving experience, and you'll understand what will then be required in the exercises. It will be a lot easier for you to do that. So then that's basically the plan, to read the chapter, start at the first page of Chapter 2, and read it and do what it says and listen to the video, and I'm just kind of go through it with you. This is my first time going through the book. I'm really excited about this book versus other books I've used in the past. It's not as for dummies. It's not as like do step 1, do step 2, do step 3 in the actual chapters. It kind of, you have to read the pages and then say, okay, what is it really telling me to do? I wish it highlighted the actual do this, do that step better. But what's really good is it's not 4 or 5 pages on one thing. It really is. You can read like 2 pages. It's a page of information with a photograph, with a screenshot, and it basically, you can just kind of just start out, do this, do this, do this. And if you plan like probably a couple of hours, I think we should be able to get through this in a half an hour's time or better. We'll see, and we'll see how long this video is, and we should basically get through the whole chapter pretty quickly, reading the book and then doing what it says. So the first thing it does, so let's get started, and I'm going to pause and then flip to screenshot. Okay, here we go. So in the book, if you go to page 41, you'll see a listing of what's going to be covered in Chapter 2. Also, if you haven't already, if you go through the PowerPoint on Chapter 2, we kind of get a high-level overview of everything. Page 42 talks about the home tab of MySQL Workbench. So to get there, start all programs, MySQL Workbench, and it will pop it up. And you'll see that it's divided into 3 sections: the SQL development section, data modeling, and server administration. You have already installed an instance of the MySQL database tools, and you can see it says local instance of MySQL 5.6. Now, within the instance of MySQL, you can have many different databases. You can have an accounting database, you can have a sales database, you can have a hobbies database, and within that you can have a lot of different types of tables within there. And you could actually have more than one instance of MySQL on your machine. You could have 3 or 4 instances of MySQL, do the installation you did, but put it somewhere else and call it something else slightly different. So the first thing I want you to do, if you're on page 43, is go Start All Programs, MySQL Workbench, and that will get you to here. From there, you want to start the database server, and you want to make sure that it's up and running. And to do that, local instance MySQL, I'm going to double click on this. So maybe in your install, it's running in the background already, depending on how you did that. What am I getting for an error? There we go. So now what happened here is I was able to get right to it. It didn't prompt me for my password because I've already been in the database. Remember when you did an install when you first installed MySQL, it asked you for a password, and you wrote it down and you didn't forget it. It will prompt you for that, and will also give you a little pop-up that says, do you want to store it in the keychain? And you say yes, you do, and that way you don't have to pull it up again. Now here, matter of fact, you can see that it remembered where I was at creating the databases. So I'm just going to actually close that down, and by default it's saying show the databases. There's a SQL line here, and if I just highlight it, if I click this right here, it's going to show the databases, and here's 7 rows returned, and notice right here it's displaying the different databases that are here: information, AP, EX, MySQL, OM, performance, and test. And we could actually create our own database, and later on we will do that. We'll be creating more databases. And notice here there's objects, and that you can actually see the databases from a visual point of view, and you can see the tables for each. So by now, if you're at this point, we're actually ready to be on page 48 in the book. And if you double click on this AP, you can start seeing that these objects are available, and we can choose any one of these tables that we might want to deal with or look at. So on page 48 and 49, it talks about the object browser, and you can see under these schemas, or the other word for schema is database, AP, EX, OM. I'm going to open up the AP, and you can see there are tables that are listed. There are no views currently, and there are no routines currently. But if I was to take a look and say like vendors, if I right click and I go select rows 1000, notice that it put a command up in the SQL editor, select star from AP vendors, and then it executed it, and then it actually is showing the data from that. So go ahead and do that. Just right click and just grab any table and then do a select, and then you'll see that it is executing that and showing the tables. Now if I take that in terms, and what if I just change the typing and I go invoices and then run, now it's actually executing the command. So what's interesting is you can actually execute commands, SQL commands, here in the editor window, seeing the the results of that right here, or you can actually choose in the object browser, right-click, and then you can run it exactly from there. So I'm going to go back to vendors, select rows, and if I was to say something like add where vendor ID equals 1, and then run a select. Now notice that with this where clause, it's actually only showing me that single vendor. Where vendor ID equals 5, and I hit now it's showing me vendor 5. So these are commands that you'll be learning moving on. But on page 48, 49, basically it's introducing you to the object browser, so you can see the various objects, the databases, and the tables within each, and you start to execute some of the commands, and you'll be able to see the data. And now, matter of fact, that just takes us right there to page 50. You can right-click on a table name and select the table, and then issue the command. So we've already done that. That gets us to page 51 already, and we've executed that. Now, by now, hopefully what you've done is chosen a couple of these tables here, right-clicked on them. I'll do invoices, right-click, select, and you'll see the command was displayed and the results were replied here. Also notice a lot of times additional tabs will get created each time you did that. So these tabs at any given point, you can just X them and get rid of them, and that helps keeping things cleaned up. Having multiple tabs also is helpful because you can go back and forth. So I'm going to go vendors, right-click, and select. And now I'm seeing all the data that's in my vendors table. Now, the table itself, if you notice, has rows. That's a grouping of information, but it also has columns: vendor ID, vendor name, vendor address 1, vendor address 2, vendor city, vendor state, vendor zip, vendor phone, vendor contact, first name, default terms ID. This is a reference to the terms table, and the default account number. And so let's, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but this default terms ID, notice says 13432. If I take a look at this terms, right click and select, notice these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here's the terms for each one of those vendors. I'm going to click back here. So when I'm referencing a default terms ID for a given vendor, 1, 3, 4, or 5, I'm actually referencing from the AP terms table this data and this information. This allows, what happens is every vendor has a certain term that they have to pay their bill by, and that allows that. But that's the relationship that gets built, where what we can do is be looking at the vendor table, knowing that this key, this term ID, will relate to the AP terms table here. But let's talk a little bit about the what table does it have? The vendors table here. We're viewing the vendors table, and the vendors table has various columns. If I right-click on the vendors table and choose Alter Table, now don't be afraid of Alter Table because you're not going to alter it right upon clicking it. Another tab appears, and what you're seeing here is the definition of each of the columns. The column name, the data type, and later on in the book we will talk about the data types. And is this a primary key? Does it mean not null? NN is, must you have data in here? UQ is unique index. In other words, it's got to be it has to be a unique index in that you can't have duplicate values in that column. It's a binary that would be true, false, 1 or a 0. Unassigned data type. Fill up values with zeros if it's numeric. So you can choose on a data type that basically, if that field is empty, put a 0 there. That way you can do math with it. Auto increment allows for numbers to be able to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And what's the default value you want to put into a given field? A lot of times it'll be a null value. Sometimes you might want a field, no matter what, to always have this unless it gets changed. So what happens is we have this instance of MySQL that we've created. We have a database living within it called AP. Within that, we have tables. Within the tables, we have columns. And the columns all have unique characteristics for the type of data that's going to be stored in that column. And that gets us basically up to page 50. Okay, so that was a brief introduction to data types and columns, but from there, we're going to spend a lot more time in the future on this. If you now go to page 55 in the book, 54 and 55, we've already done it. I did it kind of ad hoc, executing a SQL statement, and these SQL statements are listed on Blackboard. I'm going to close this tab, and I'm going to put up the SQL statement. Select vendor name, vendor city, vendor state from the table called vendors, order by vendor name. Now, instead of going select star basically says, give me everything. Here, I only want these 3 columns. And now what I have is vendor name, vendors, and I've basically clicked it on the little lightning bolt, and that's run this command, vendor name, vendor city, and vendor state. And you can see they're in alphabetical order. And now if I wanted to, I could then say, how about change this by vendor state, and then run it. And now you can see it's Arizona, California, and that they're in order of state, but within a given state, they're actually not in vendor name order. So I'm going to just go comma and then go vendor name. And now if I execute it again, now it's by vendor state, but then also it's alphabetically by vendor name. So now we're already getting into a little more complex SQL statements that we can have data stored in a table and display that data in order, in any order that we want. So sometimes in performing database functions, we will do a lot of the same types of things over and over again, and you don't want to have to type this information over and over again. If you notice over here, there is a thing called SQL additions, and then it says right here, my snippets, and there's actually some predefined snippets already stored here that are available, and you can pull them out and see them. But under my snippets right now, there isn't any. Now this snippet right here, this code that we executed, without doing anything, we can just hit this little asterisk and then save it as a snippet. And now it's there that if I was to double click on this and then I can hit done, the snippet can then get executed. I can right click, execute the snippet, and now it just ran the snippet. Now on page 57, take a minute and then type out that snippet of code into this section here, and then save it as a snippet and execute it. So I'm going to stop a minute and I'm going to type that code out, and then after it's typed, I'll execute it and save it as a snippet. Okay, so here you go. You can see that I have the code typed exactly as it's listed on page 57. And what's interesting here, when I run the code, I'm not getting any results. And if you look down at the very bottom, it says table AP invoice doesn't exist. And what happened is on page 57, the book's actually wrong, that there is no invoice table. The table is actually invoices. So if I now add the letter S to the word here, invoices, and then executed it, now I'm getting all of the data from that. Now from here, if I go back to my snippets now, and now that I've got working code, I can then save this, and now this code is available to run and execute. Here's my first one. I'm going to execute that snippet. Here's my second one, and I'm going to execute that snippet. So snippets are a nice way to save pieces of code. You can even create snippet categories of your own. You can create, snippet 1, snippet 2, snippet 3, maybe some snippets based upon project and things like that. But it's a nice way of storing code that you're using over and over again. Let's move on. There are typically two types of errors when dealing with coding. One is a fatal error, that something really, really broke and busted, and others is a syntax error, and basically that's a user error. Most likely you typed something wrong and misnamed something. We already got that. I'm on page 58 and 59 in the book, and we already got that with the invoices table, but here you can see I'm saying select vendor, vendor name, vendor city, from vendor, order by vendor name. And if I execute this, I don't get any data, and then down at the bottom it says AP table vendor doesn't exist. Well, the table name is actually vendors. If I add the letter S there, and then if I execute it, now it's coming back correctly, and down at the bottom it's telling me that 122 rows of data have been performed. Typically, most errors in the database work that you do is typos. There will be times when maybe you're putting a wrong data type into, like a character string into a numeric or something like that, and that can cause you problems, and that'll give you an execution error, not a syntax error. So be looking at what it is. And typically the message down at the bottom will tell you and give you a clue as to what's wrong and where to look for your problem. Now, this next step on page 60 and 61 is executing a pre-existing script. Now, you've already actually done this by the fact that you've created these, but let's review this, where we go File, Open SQL Script. And if you remember correctly, on my E drive, I actually have a MURACH 2, MySQL, book scripts, and I'm in chapter 2. And if we take a look at this total do script and double click on that, there's the script. It pulls up the script automatically, so it's already been saved. And then I run it, and I see that I have 11 invoices with a total of $32,000 that is due. It's selecting, doing a count star. This code right here is basically saying count the rows, and basically it's saying I want the column name of this to be called a number of invoices, and then I want you to do a sum of this code, and I want you to display the header total due. And so, and see here it says number of invoices total due. So if I was to change this to total due, and then change this to invoice count, and then run it. Oops, it even got my typo there. Notice here now it says invoice count and total due. So from the invoices table, where the invoice total minus the payment total minus the credit is greater than 0. So there what we've done is we've taken a pre-existing script, found it with the file Open SQL script, run it, and then we've even modified the script while it's in the editor. And if we wanted to, we could even save it as a snippet if we wanted to use it again. Or maybe we might store this. A lot of times what I do is, if I'm working on a project in Notepad++, I'll open up Notepad++, and then I would just cut and paste, and I would just start a file of of SQL statements that I needed to refer back to, and this would be part of my documentation. And sometimes it ends up being some really helpful tools to have just this file of SQL statements of little go-to SQL code that you might need for something. Okay, so that gets us up to page 63. On page 64 in the book, let's see, oh, yeah, I don't want to save that tab. Okay, on page 64 in the book, it talks about documentation. You might need some help. So just like any piece of software, there's the help. And if I go to the MySQL.com website, and there's a documentation tab, you can find the version of SQL we're using. And then you can download it as a PDF file, or you can view it online, and tons of great information in the manual. When in doubt, refer to the directions. Okay, so this takes us to page 66, 67, 68, and 69 in the book. And if I just kind of push this off to the side, push Workbench just off to the side, it talks about running SQL Monitor, or it's otherwise known as the SQL command line. So if I go Start, All Programs, MySQL 5.5, you'll see the command line. A window will pop up and appear. Remember our password. And we're at what is known as the SQL prompt now. And if I say show databases, and make sure you put the semicolon after it and hit enter, it shows me all the databases that are available to me. If I say use AP, now I'm in the AP database. And if I go select vendor/name, comma, vendor _ state. Oops, notice that I typed select wrong. That's going to give me an error. Select vendor/name, vendor/state from vendors, semicolon. Now it's listing the vendors, and if I use the up arrow and then say order by vendor name, now it's alphabetical. And so that gives you kind of an introduction to the page 66, 67, 68, and 69, and the command line. So everything that we do here, so I can go select vendor name, vendor state from vendors, order by vendor name. Everything I'm doing there in the Workbench, I can do in the monitor. And the monitor is basically, the command line is old school, and that's how we had to use to do all the database work way back when, a long time ago. So having the SQL Workbench, the ability to have snippets, the ability to see the data right here, having an editor section, and having output and seeing our errors and seeing our responses definitely makes our life a lot easier. So this is the end of chapter 2. A good overview. You've had a good test drive by going through the chapter and doing the work. And what you'll see that there's a lot of information in the chapter, but by taking it a couple of pages at a time, and the book's really laid out nicely. You can just read the page, you'll see the results, and just do it. Just do exactly what it says, and by the end of that chapter, you'll say, okay, I'm starting to get it, I'm starting to understand. And then at the end, you'll basically be responsible for doing the exercises. And I'm sure along the way, we'll add a few extra special projects as we start thinking about the data and thinking about how can we apply this to our own lives. So In our command line, we can type exit, and that closes that. And in our SQL Workbench, we can go File, Exit, and that closes that. And we can say goodbye. Have a great day. Thank you.